Hello, callsign Latrobe here, and welcome to my ACESI tutorial videos. In this video I will be teaching you how to take off and land your aircraft. In ACESI you can manually take off, or there is an option for auto takeoff. If you open your clipboard by pressing the escape key on your keyboard and click Options, Preferences, and Flight, you will see an option for auto takeoff. You can check the box to turn this on, or uncheck the box to turn it off. If you have this turned on, then your plane will take off by itself with no control input from you whatsoever, other than throttle control. If you move anything besides your throttle controls with auto takeoff enabled, that being moving your stick or rudder, or pushing any of the autopilot keys, the auto takeoff will disengage. If that happens, then you can re-enable auto takeoff by pressing Alt-X on your keyboard. To take off, you'll need your RPMs at maximum. You can increase or decrease your RPMs with the plus and minus keys on your keyboard. While idle on the runway, your RPM gauge won't show any changes until you apply some throttle. To see if you are at max RPMs, look for a small lever found next to your throttle. You want this lever pushed all the way forward. All you have to do now is apply full throttle and the plane will take off by itself. Remember not to move your controls or press your autopilot keys, or else auto takeoff will disengage. And to re-enable it, just press Alt and X on your keyboard. Taking off manually without auto takeoff can be a little tricky at first, but with just a little practice it will become second nature to you. When you throttle up, the torque of the engine will start to turn your aircraft in the direction of the torque. You will need to use your rudder to keep your plane as straight as possible. Gently increasing your throttle will help you keep control of your aircraft better than immediately going full power. Additionally, you can pull back on your stick, which will lock your tail wheel, making takeoff even easier. However, once you gain some speed, you will want to center your stick again, or else your plane will take off prematurely and you will stall and crash. First, I will demonstrate taking off with just rudder control. I check to make sure that my RPMs are at maximum, and I slowly throttle up. As you gain speed, it will become easier to keep your plane straight. At roughly 150 miles per hour, you want to gently pull back on the stick and your plane will take off. Now pull your landing gear up by pressing G on the keyboard and you are now flying the aircraft. Now I will show you how to take off with the assistance of locking your tail wheel. I check my RPMs, pull back on the stick locking my tail wheel, and throttle up. Notice how the aircraft is much more controllable now. Now I have some speed, so I center my stick. At 150 miles per hour, I gently pull back on the stick, get airborne, and pull the landing gears up. Landing is more difficult than taking off, but again, with a little practice, it will become second nature to you. The first things you need to do to land is lose some speed and altitude. So start by pulling your throttle back and dropping some altitude. The target speed you're looking for is roughly 200 miles per hour. At this speed, most planes can start deploying their flaps and landing gears, Once you get below 200 miles per hour, then you can start deploying some flaps. Be careful though, as flaps create drag to slow you down, but also create lift, and the nose of your aircraft will start to rise, putting you at risk of a stall. Below 180 miles per hour, you can deploy your landing gears. Watch your speed and be aware of how your plane is acting. If you get too slow, then you will stall and crash, so gently applying throttle is important. Lining up for the runway can be a challenge in itself. I find it easiest to line up my gun sight with the far end of the runway. This will always bring you in right over the runway. If you lose sight of the runway under your nose, then shift your head position to the side of your cockpit with the arrow keys and look for the runway off the side of your nose. Once you're just a few feet over the runway, you want to bring the nose of your aircraft up slightly. This will bring you in for a nice smooth landing and has the added benefit of not hitting your prop off the ground. When you get your wheels on the ground, then you want to apply brakes with your spacebar. In aces high, it's impossible to apply too much brake and nose over into the ground, so don't be afraid to hold down the brakes. Now that you've landed, you can rearm your plane at one of the rearm pads at the ends of the runway. This will reload your guns, fuel, and any oars or drop tanks you had on, but will not repair damage. Or, you can choose to end your sortie by clicking End Sortie on your clipboard, or bringing the text buffer up with the / key on your keyboard, typing .ef and hitting Enter. Landing and taking off from a carrier is just about the same as landing and taking off from an airbase, but with a few key differences. One being the runway is shorter and constantly moving. The other being carrier planes use a tailhook and arresting cables to stop your aircraft. Auto takeoff will work on carriers unless the carrier is turning or your plane is loaded up with oars. When the carrier is turning, then you can either wait for it to straighten out or manually take off. Taking off from a turning carrier though is very dangerous and requires a lot of practice. When you are loaded down with oars, the auto takeoff might not get you airborne before you run out of runway, as you see here. Even with auto takeoff, I still plunge straight into the water. What you will need to do is drop flaps to generate more lift and possibly engage war emergency power with the P key on your keyboard. With flaps deployed, I am now able to take off in the carrier while carrying ordnance. Landing on a carrier can be very tricky since the runway is constantly moving. First things first though, you need to lose speed and lower your altitude to at least 2,000 feet above ground level. Once you are at 200 miles per hour, you need to start deploying your flaps and then your landing gear. You will also need to deploy your tailhook by pressing Shift G on your keyboard. The word hook next to your landing gear gauge being lit up green will let you know that your tailhook has deployed. Lining up on a carrier is very difficult since being just a tad too high will cause you to miss the arresting cables and a tad too low will have you crashing into the back of the carrier. I find the best method is to fly a zigzag path all the way in, which allows you to keep an eye on the carrier at all times. The rearm pad on the carrier is located inside the arresting cables, so if you miss it just like I did here, then you don't have to end your sortie to get more bombs and bullets. What you do is pull your tailhook back up and slowly throttle up. Eventually you will start rolling backwards. Once inside the arresting cables, pull your throttle back and hit the brakes. That's how you take off and land from air bases and carriers. Keep practicing and one day you'll become an ace pilot yourself.